Hello, this is Robbie Mitchell here from Head in the Cloud Development. Today I'm going to show you how to use NetSuite's SuiteScript 2.1 API the Head in the Cloud way. We'll be coding in TypeScript using the build tools that Head in the Cloud has created to make writing and uploading SuiteScripts faster, easier, and more reliable. This video is being recorded in May 2024 on NetSuite version 2024.1. Before we get into it, let's talk about what has changed since the last video I did like this a year ago. Really, just the environment that I'm demonstrating this in has changed. Basically, in my videos, I alternate between using Mac OS and Windows, and also between using WebStorm and VS Code. So in this rotation for year 2024, here we are using VS Code on Mac OS. If you're looking for tutorials on Windows or Linux, or using WebStorm, just check out my other videos, because they're there and they're still pretty accurate. And of course, let me mention that this is not an SDF tutorial. SDF is great, and I've published several tutorials on it, but this video isn't one. The way we will upload code to NetSuite in this video is using the Head in the Cloud uploader, which has been around quite a few years longer than SDF. So you might ask, if SDF is so great, why would I want to use the HITC uploader? Well, two reasons come to mind. First, maybe you've inherited an old repository that was done 10 years ago. There's not much benefit to migrating it to SDF, and these tools still work great. We use them every day. Second, SDF is great if you're needing to manage objects in XML, but if all you're concerned about is SuiteScript and being able to manage which production or sandbox environment your code uploads to very quickly and easily, then our tool is simply better for the job. So moving on, the goals of this video are to get you set up with a development environment that can automatically upload TypeScript code to NetSuite using token-based authentication, and to enable you to have the SuiteScript 2.0 API IntelliSense as you type, and to walk through a real-life example writing SuiteScript in 2.1. I'm going to show you how to implement a custom close button on sales orders. We'll demonstrate how to upload, implement, and test our scripts in NetSuite. This video is intended for NetSuite developers and administrators. You should have the administrator role in NetSuite to do everything I do here. You should at least be familiar with JavaScript and basic web technologies here, and I assume you have some level of familiarity with the SuiteScript API. So let's download some software and get started. The IDE we'll be using is VS Code by Microsoft. Unlike WebStorm, it is totally free. We can download it from this URL. And just to note, I'm actually doing this for real. I'm on a new Mac computer here, and I've never installed these applications or done any SuiteScript development here. So I'm doing this for real, so I apologize if there are any side effects of real life here. The only thing I will mention, though, is that I have already installed Xcode. To be honest, I'm not sure if it's required, but I know Xcode does come with some system components that at some point may have been required, so if anything goes wrong, try installing Xcode just so you have those system components. And after you install it, you do need to open it at least once just to kind of accept the user agreements and stuff. This is what I'm talking about here. It installs some additional components which are helpful. After I've done that, I'll just quit Xcode. Okay, we've got VS Code downloaded. Let's go ahead and install this. Just have to drag it into my applications folder, and I can delete the zip. Second, we do need to have Node.js installed. We'll go here and just install whatever the most recent long-term support version is. Just going to click on this download button here. Let's go ahead and install Node. Okay. And finally, let's go ahead and download the script files for this project. I created a GitHub repository to put them in. I'm just going to do download zip. And I'm just going to put them in my documents folder. Okay, so let's go ahead and start up VS Code. And drag it onto my dock here. And the first thing we can do, we can close the welcome page and just open the folder. Okay, before we get into what all the files are here, one thing to mention about when we're using Node and gulp is that we need to have gulp installed globally. So to do that, I'm going to open a terminal here in VS Code, and I'm just going to run npm install -g gulp. This will hopefully just take a few seconds. And I got a node permissions error. I'm actually glad this came up because this is a relatively common thing on Mac, and I've fixed it before, and I will happily show you how to do that now. I have this handy Google Doc that helps us remember how to fix this. So in the terminal, I'm going to type in who am I. My username is Robin. So now I'm going to enter, move this to the side so we can see it a bit better. Sudo change owner Robin user / local. And apparently that doesn't always work, so I have a note here. If that doesn't work, try doing it on these 3 specific directories instead. User / local / lib / node modules, user / local / bin, and / local / share. Okay, so after I've done that, let's try my npm install on gulp again. Okay, that worked much better. Perfect. All right, so before we go further here, let's actually get into NetSuite. So I'm in my developer account here, and what we need to do, if you haven't already done it, is install the HITC Uploader bundle. So to do that, go to Customization Suite Bundler, search and install bundles, and if you just type in head in the cloud, it's probably the first one that'll come up. Yeah, the head in the cloud upload RESTlet. Now I already have it installed here, so I can't demonstrate this part for real. But all you have to do is click the blue install button, and it'll take a few minutes, but it basically just adds a RESTlet and a role that we use here. And before we go create our token, I'll mention that if you don't have token-based authentication switched on yet, you can go to Setup Company, Enable Features, and switch it on there. I believe it's under the Suite Cloud tab. So if you don't already have it, make sure to edit your employee record and add the HITC uploader role once the bundle gets done installing. Once you've got all that, we can finally go create our token. So we'll go to Setup, Users and Roles, Access Tokens New. Select HITC uploader, choose yourself, choose the HITC uploader role. And if you're going to be using this on multiple computers, I usually note what computer I'm on here. I'm just going to note that we're doing it for the video, so I can delete this token when I'm done. And now it's important not to navigate away from this page now, because these token values will not show if you do. So I'm just going to leave this here, and let's switch back to VS Code. I'm going to close the terminal for a minute, and let's just look at what we've got here. We'll look at each file and I'll explain them quickly. Let's start with package.json. When using Node.js, a package.json file tells the Node package manager which packages and versions need to be installed. So this file is how we tell it to load our 3 head in the cloud modules that we use to validate our code against the API and upload it to NetSuite. Now to install these packages, let's open up our terminal again and just run npm install. When you do this, it's going to install these modules into a Node modules folder here. So the next file we can look at is tsconfig.json. This file controls how TypeScript files are handled. So here we see that we're compiling to ES 2020 version of JavaScript. You shouldn't really need to change anything else here. The next file we'll look at is our .hitc upload file. This is the file that tells the uploader which NetSuite accounts pertain to this project, which accounts we'll be uploading to, in other words. So for example, here you might have your production account, a sandbox, and a release preview. The file contains a list of objects where we specify a NetSuite account number, a file cabinet folder, and a name. You'll see how this is used in a few minutes. Now I've got two things listed here just for demonstration. If you only have one account listed, then when you upload, it'll skip the step of asking which account you want to upload to, which is nice when you're only dealing with one account. So to go along with this, we need to create our token file. So let's click New File, and we call it .hitc-upload-token. So this is an array of token objects. So each object here needs to have a company ID, a token ID, and a token secret. So the company ID is how we link it to the account that the token belongs to. The token ID is this, and the token secret is this value. So I'll save that. So now let's talk about how to actually trigger the upload of a script from VS Code. Take a look at this hidden .vs code folder. There's a tasks.json file here. What this does is it defines a build and upload just this file task that uses gulp. We just need to link this to a keyboard shortcut. So for keyboard shortcuts, we go to the Code menu, Settings, and Keyboard Shortcuts. Here, just type in the word build, and you should find your run build task. It looks like it's already mapped to Command-Shift-B for me, so that's good. That's actually what I want. If you don't have it mapped, go ahead and change that now using the pencil icon. We'll test that in a couple of minutes. So let's go back to NetSuite and talk about what we're actually going to do here. A question we get asked occasionally at Head in the Cloud is, can we do some custom logic when a user closes a sales order? Maybe like set a value, like a date closed, or something like that. Now last time I checked, the built-in close button on a sales order doesn't trigger any scripts when it's clicked. What this means is that the only way to do custom logic when an order is closed is to actually replace this close button with a custom button that closes the order and does whatever else you want to happen. Make sense? Okay, let me show you how it's done. So in VS Code, if we go into our SSV2 folder, here are the scripts that I've prepared for you. The first thing we want to do is use a user event script to add a new button onto our sales order form here. So as a starting point, this sales order user event.ts is our script shell file. The before load entry point is the one that runs as a user is loading the sales order. So in our user event script, it's always good to think about what context you do and do not want your code to run in. For example, when we're talking about adding a close button, we want to do that when a user is viewing an existing sales order, but not when they're creating or editing one. So this is how we specify that our code should run in view mode only. So what we want to do is use the form.addButton method to add a button to the form. Second, we need to tell it which script file the function will be in that runs when a user actually clicks the button. Ours is going to be just in this sales order client script. So we'll say context.form.client script module path equals /sales order client.js. Now there's one more thing we need to think about here. Sales orders are probably the most heavily operated on record in NetSuite. And oftentimes, sales orders are loaded server-side by other scripts and integrations. I can tell you from experience that the code we have here to add buttons and scripts on a sales order can sometimes fail when the sales order gets loaded by some random integration, as opposed to being loaded by a human in a web browser. I think the reason has to do with that there isn't really a form object when a script is just loaded server-side by an integration. So how do we protect the system from this? We'll use the runtime module to say to only do this in user interface context. Trust me, this will save you some headaches later on. So this is how we import the runtime module. And then we'll just do it inside our view mode statement. We'll say if runtime.execution context equals runtime.contextType.userInterface. Let's just move our lines of code into here. Okay, so let's upload and deploy this. Alright, moment of truth. If I press Command-Shift-B, it executes the task and asks me which account from my HITC upload file I want to upload to. I'm going to say number 1 for HITC dev. And that's amazing, it actually worked. So let's deploy our script. We'll go to Customization, Scripting, Scripts, New. Type in sales order user event. Here it is. Click Create Script Record. Copy and paste the file name or the script name in. I'll set a simple ID. Apparently I've been working too much in Quebec lately. So now let's deploy it to a sales order. And let's go back and look at my sales order. And there's our new button. Great. So far so good. Now let's take a look at our sales order client script shell. This is where we're going to implement the click handler function for our button. It's a client script because it runs in the user's web browser, and we only have this page_init function here so that it'll validate to NetSuite as a valid client script. But what did we say we were going to call our button function again? Let's just copy and paste it. So for button functions, we have to use export. Alright, so what do we actually need to do when this button is clicked? Basically, we need to load the sales order record and mark each line as closed. The way a sales order is closed in NetSuite is when the closed checkbox is checked on all the lines, or if they've been processed. So the fact that we're going to need to load the sales order in a client script means that we'll want to use promises. And to make promises a bit cleaner, we can make this an async function. And the first step here is to use the current record module to find out what sales order we're even on. So I'll import that here. And here I can say await current record.get.promise. And when you're in view mode, this basically gets us the current record type and ID. So now using that information, we can load the whole sales order record. And of course I need to import the record module before I can actually use it. Now that we have it loaded, we just need to loop through the lines and close each one. I missed a character there. Sorry about that. So the way we close the line is to say salesorder.set sublist value. Sublist ID is item, field ID is closed, line value true. And before we save it, just to make our button a bit different than the built-in button, let's set the memo on the sales order. Just say when the sales order was closed. And then we'll save it. And after we save it, let's reload the page. All right, now let's upload and test this. So I'm just going to refresh my sales order. And you don't need to create a script record when you just have button functions, so it should work already in theory. I'm going to click the button. Something kind of seems to be happening. The browser's a little bit slower to respond. Let's see if the page refreshes. All right, the window finally reloaded. So the sales order is closed and the memo is set. So that worked, but to be honest, the user experience wasn't very smooth. I didn't really know what was going on, and it took a minute, probably because it was the first one of the day. But what can we do to make that smoother? What if we add one of those NetSuite banners at the top of the page to tell the user what's happening? To do that, we need to use the UI message module. And then here, the first thing we can do is just pop open a message, say message.create. For the type, we'll use the blue message.type.information category. Title we'll say is closing sales order, and the message will be, this will take a few seconds, then the page will refresh. And we need to say .show. So let's upload that. Refresh. Now even though it's already closed, I can still close it again right now because we haven't implemented anything saying to only show this button when it's not closed. That would be a good idea, but this actually helps for testing. So look, here's our banner. That's really nice. So now I know something is happening. And in theory, the page should refresh. Yep, there it is. And it has updated to the current time. So great. That really helps out a lot. So are we done? Well, to be honest, there's one big problem. Doing this sort of record operation in a client script really is not a good idea. Believe it or not, strange things happen in NetSuite, maybe involving different user roles and whatnot, and one problem we have here is that there's no logging happening. So if something goes wrong when some real user is using this, I have no way of seeing what happened and what failed to happen and where the error is, and that's not a good situation to be in. That's going to make it really difficult to troubleshoot. So how do we solve this problem? The answer is to use a suitelet to close the order. And I'm going to show you a pattern that we use a lot here at Head in the Cloud, because believe it or not, there are a lot of operations like this in NetSuite that you'll want to trigger from a suitelet. So what we have here is a empty server task suitelet script shell. I call it server task suitelet because the suitelet is meant to handle any number of little things that aren't really deserving of their own suitelet. We're going to implement this cleanly by implementing a mode parameter. Let me show you how this works. So the mode is something we totally make up, so I could call it anything I want, but I'm going to call it close sales order because that's what we're doing. So then what we do is we make a function here, the same name. We're going to pass in our parameters from the suitelet, and what we need here is just the sales order ID. So I'm going to say sales order ID as a string. Then the function needs to return a string as well. And the way we call it is to say context.response.write close sales order, and we'll pass in the request parameters. And now you can imagine if you had 5 or 6 other little things like this, you can pretty cleanly, you could even use a switch statement to just go through the modes here. And it's always a good idea to include some logging, so let's do that. That is why we're doing this after all, so we can have good logging. So we'll log what mode the suitelet is executing in, and what the method is, and we'll have a timestamp for performance checking. So now, in this close sales order function, we can start by basically copying our code from our client script. We'll remove any await and promise references since this is server-side code. We don't need to use promises here. We do need the record module. And the way to reference the sales order here is to say params.salesorderID. And what we'll return if it works is just the word success. I'll show you how this links back to the client script in a minute. But again, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's continue to add helpful logging. So when something does go wrong, we know where it went wrong. Let's log before we save it. And now from experience, you might know that saving the sales order is what's most likely to go wrong here. So we'll put a try catch around that. If it goes wrong, we'll do an error log saying that we failed to save the sales order. And why. Then we'll return that message to the client script as well. Okay, this looks pretty good. Let's upload this and implement this suitelet. So I'll go to scripting, scripts new, my server task suitelet. Let's copy the script ID because we're going to need it. And I'll mention when we deploy the suitelet, you'll want to think about whether you leave it to execute as the current role or if you need to set it to run as some other role. I'm going to leave mine to execute as current role. So now that we've got this deployed, let's update our client script to use the suitelet. So we can comment out what we've got here about loading the sales order. We can remove the record module. We're not going to need that anymore. So instead, we're going to need the URL module to look up our suitelet URL, and then the HTTPS module to call the suitelet. So I'll go ahead and import those. Now I still need this because we do need to know what sales order ID we're on, but let me show you how to get the suitelet URL. So I have the script ID on my clipboard here. I copied it. So I'm going to say const server task suitelet url.resolve script. Script ID is that, and deployment ID is just custom deploy 1. So then after that, we will call the suitelet. So I'm going to say const response equals HTTPS. Actually, this is a promise, so we'll say await HTTPS dot post. We're doing a post because we're changing a record. Post.promise URL is server task suitelet. The body of the request, we need the mode, which we said is close sales order. And we need the sales order ID, which is rec.id. Okay. So now from our suitelet, we know that if the response comes back as success, then it worked. So what I'm going to say here is if the response.body is not success, then let's alert what did happen. So if it works, the page should just reload, but if it's not, if there's anything other than success, the user will see it. So let's upload this and test it. I'm going to go back and refresh my sales order. Click close. So it seems to work. Okay, yep, it only took a few seconds. And if I check my suitelet, here are our execution logs. So starting mode, close sales order, 14 seconds after the minute, loaded the sales order and saved it. And if we really cared about performance, we would also log when the save operation finished, but thankfully it's happening pretty quickly here, so that's not something I need to worry about. So this seems to work great, so nice work. So congratulations, you now know how to create and debug SuiteScripts in NetSuite. Give us a shout if you have any questions, otherwise we'll see you at SuiteWorld. Thank you for watching.